The sound of a single gunshot echoed through the valley, shattering Elizabeth Zimmerman's world as surely as it had the stillness of the autumn evening. She stood frozen on the dusty main street of Lone Pine, California, watching helplessly as her father's body crumpled to the ground in front of the bank he'd spent 15 years building from nothing. Pa! The scream tore from her throat as she ran toward him, dropping to her knees beside his still form. Blood soaked through his white shirt, staining it crimson. His eyes, already growing dim, found hers. "Run, Lizzie," he whispered. "Don't let them take everything." Those were James Zimmerman's final words before the light faded from his eyes. Elizabeth clutched his hand, unable to process what had just happened. Around her, chaos erupted as the 5 masked bandits who had robbed the Lone Pine Bank mounted their horses, saddlebags heavy with the town's money, her father's life's work. It was October 1873, and at 22, Elizabeth Zimmerman had just lost everything. "Pa, please," she sobbed, cradling his head in her lap as townsfolk gathered around. "Please don't leave me." Sheriff Mills arrived too late, his deputy trailing behind. "Miss Zimmerman," he said gently, removing his hat, "I'm sorry. We'll catch these men, I promise you that." But Elizabeth barely heard him. Her world had narrowed to her father's still face, to the blood seeping into the dirt of Main Street. Her mother had passed 3 winters ago from consumption, and now her father was gone too. The bank would likely fold without him. The home they'd built together would be empty. She was alone. The next days passed in a blur. The funeral was held in the small churchyard where her mother was buried. The entire town came to pay their respects to James Zimmerman, a man known for his fairness and generosity. Elizabeth stood straight-backed beside the grave, accepting condolences with dry eyes. It wasn't until later, alone in the house that no longer felt like home, that the tears came. They wouldn't stop. 1 week after the funeral, the board of directors for the Lone Pine Bank called a meeting. Elizabeth sat across from 4 solemn-faced men in dark suits, her black mourning dress buttoned to her throat despite the lingering heat of early autumn. "Miss Zimmerman," began Mr. Hollister, the eldest of the directors, "your father was a fine man, the finest. But I'm afraid the bank cannot continue operations under the current circumstances." "What do you mean?" Elizabeth asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "The robbers took nearly all our liquid assets. The insurance won't cover but a fraction, and with your father gone—" He cleared his throat uncomfortably. "We have no choice but to close the bank's doors. But my father built this bank from nothing. Surely there's something we can do." "I'm afraid not, my dear. The board has voted unanimously. The bank will be dissolved, its remaining assets distributed to investors." "And what about my father's personal investment, our home?" Elizabeth's heart began to pound. She already knew the answer. "I'm sorry to say your father had leveraged the property as collateral for the bank's latest expansion. With the bank's failure—" Mr. Hollister wouldn't meet her eyes. "The house will revert to the creditors." Elizabeth sat very still, her gloved hands folded in her lap. "When must I leave?" "You have until the end of the month. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to say goodbye to everything she had ever known. 3 weeks to figure out where to go and how to live. Her teaching certificate might get her a position somewhere, but school terms had already started for the year." She left the bank in a daze, barely seeing the sympathetic glances from townspeople as she made her way home. The house, soon to be someone else's house, stood on the edge of town, a handsome 2-story structure her father had built when they first arrived in Lone Pine. Elizabeth had been 7 then, clutching her mother's hand as they stepped down from the stagecoach into their new life. Now, at 22, she would be leaving alone. Inside, she sank to the floor in the entranceway, finally allowing the tears to fall again. They streamed down her face unchecked as great, heaving sobs racked her body. She cried for her father, for her mother, for the home she was losing, and for the future she could no longer see. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered to the empty house. The next morning brought no answers, only a pounding at the front door that roused Elizabeth from her fitful sleep on the settee in the parlor. She smoothed her rumpled black dress and wiped at her swollen eyes before answering. Sheriff Mills stood on the porch, hat in hand. Behind him was a tall stranger with broad shoulders and a weathered face partially hidden beneath the shadow of his hat. "Miss Zimmerman," the sheriff said, nodding respectfully. "I've brought someone I think you should meet. This is Mr. Quentin Daniels. He was in Bakersfield when your father was killed and recognized the description of one of the bandits from the poster we circulated." Elizabeth's attention snapped to the stranger, truly seeing him for the first time. He stood a head taller than the sheriff, his posture easy but alert. His clothes were trail-worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a dust-covered tan vest. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the revolver looking like a natural extension of his hand. When he removed his hat, she saw that his hair was the color of sun-bleached wheat, his eyes a startling blue against his tanned skin. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I'm mighty sorry about your father." "You know who killed him?" Elizabeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe so. Man by the name of Silas Blackburn. He runs with a gang out of Nevada. I've been tracking them for near on 6 months. Why?" The man's expression hardened. "They raided my family's ranch last spring, killed my brother, took everything worth taking." Sheriff Mills cleared his throat. "Mr. Daniels is a bounty hunter, Miss Zimmerman, a good one from what I hear. He's offered to track down your father's killers and bring them to justice." Elizabeth studied the man called Quentin Daniels. There was something in his eyes, a quiet determination, a banked fire that spoke of a man who kept his promises. "The bank can't pay you," she said. "We have nothing left." "I'm not asking for payment, madam. Blackburn and his men have prices on their heads. That's payment enough for me." He paused. "Plus, I figure we both have scores to settle." Elizabeth straightened her shoulders. "When do you leave?" "First light tomorrow. Their trail's already cold, but I know where they were headed." She nodded once, decision made. "I'm coming with you." Both men stared at her in shock. "Now, Miss Zimmerman," the sheriff began, "that's no journey for a lady. These are dangerous men. They murdered my father in cold blood," Elizabeth interrupted, her voice steady. "They've taken everything I have. My home will be gone by month's end. I have nowhere to go and nothing to lose." She turned to Quentin Daniels. "I can ride and I can shoot. My father made sure of that." The bounty hunter studied her for a long moment. "It'll be hard going, dangerous, not much comfort on the trail." "I don't need comfort, Mr. Daniels. I need justice." A slight smile curved his mouth. "We leave at dawn. Pack light." After the men left, Elizabeth moved through the house with new purpose. She changed from her morning dress into her riding clothes, a split skirt and sturdy blouse her father had commissioned from the town seamstress, despite the raised eyebrows of Lone Pines matrons. She packed her saddlebags with only the essentials: a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a small pouch of coins she'd saved from teaching piano to the Miller children, and her father's Colt revolver. The gun was familiar in her hand. James Zimmerman had insisted his daughter know how to defend herself in a territory where law often came second to survival. They'd spent countless Sunday afternoons behind the house, setting up tin cans on fence posts for her to shoot. "Steady hand, steady eye, steady heart," he'd always said. She wondered what he would think of her now, preparing to hunt down his killers. That night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She wandered the rooms of her childhood home, saying goodbye to each memory. In her father's study, she found his journal, the last entry dated the day he died. She tucked it into her saddlebags without reading it, unable to bear his words just yet. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Sierras. Elizabeth was waiting on the porch, saddlebags at her feet, when Quentin Daniels rode up leading a second horse, a sturdy bay mare with intelligent eyes. "Borrowed her from the livery," he explained. "Owner owed me a favor." Elizabeth mounted smoothly, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat against the rising sun. "Which way?" "East, toward Nevada. They'll be heading for the border." They rode out of Lone Pine as the town was just beginning to stir. Elizabeth didn't look back. She couldn't bear to see the bank where her father had died or the house she would never return to. Instead, she fixed her eyes on the horizon and the back of the taciturn bounty hunter who rode ahead of her. For 3 days, they followed the trail east, making camp each night under the stars. Quentin proved to be a man of few words but considerable skills. He hunted their meals, showed her how to make camp efficiently, and kept a respectful distance around the fire each night. Elizabeth was grateful for his silence. It gave her space to grieve, to plan, to harden her resolve. On the 4th day, they reached a small mining settlement called Bitter Springs. A single dusty street lined with a saloon, general store, and a few ramshackle buildings barely qualified it as a town. Quentin led them to the saloon, tying their horses at the hitching post. "Wait here," he instructed. "These places aren't kind to women alone." "I'm not waiting outside like a child," Elizabeth replied firmly. "My father's killers may have passed through here. I need to hear what people say." Quentin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Stay close then, and let me do the talking." The saloon was dim and smoky, sparsely populated in the late afternoon. A few miners hunched over their whiskey at scattered tables. A tired-looking woman in a faded red dress leaned against the bar, while the barkeep polished glasses with a questionable rag. Conversation ceased as they entered, all eyes turning to Elizabeth. She raised her chin and followed Quentin to the bar, ignoring the whispers and stares. "Whiskey," Quentin said to the barkeep, "and information." The barkeep, a burly man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, poured a single shot. "Information costs more than whiskey, friend." Quentin slid a silver dollar across the bar. "I'm looking for 5 men. Would have come through in the last 2 weeks. One of them is Silas Blackburn." The barkeep's expression didn't change, but his hand stilled on the glass. "Don't know the name." "He knows," Elizabeth said quietly to Quentin. The bounty hunter nodded almost imperceptibly, then leaned closer to the barkeep. "The lady's father was murdered by these men. They robbed a bank in Lone Pine. There's reward money for information." Another coin joined the first. The barkeep's eyes flicked to Elizabeth, then back to Quentin. "They was here, 'bout 10 days ago, spent free, drank hard, headed north toward Carson City from what I gathered." "North?" Quentin frowned. "Not east to Nevada, that's what they said. Looking for a man called Fitzgerald, said he owed them." Elizabeth and Quentin exchanged glances. This was an unexpected development. "Who's Fitzgerald?" Elizabeth asked. The barkeep shrugged. "Mining speculator. Has a place up near Virginia City. Comes through here sometimes buying claims from men too broke to work them properly." "Is he honest?" Quentin asked, a bark of laughter. "Madam, there ain't no honest mining speculators, but he's alive, which means he's either smarter or luckier than most." They left the saloon with this new information, mounting their horses and heading north out of Bitter Springs. Elizabeth's mind raced with possibilities. Who was this Fitzgerald, and what did he have to do with her father's killers? "You think they're going after this speculator?" she asked Quentin as they rode. He nodded grimly. "Sounds like it. Maybe he crossed them somehow, or maybe they just know he has money. Either way, it gives us a direction. They rode until sunset, making camp in a sheltered gully near a small stream. After a meal of jerky and hardtack, they sat in silence by the fire. Elizabeth stared into the flames, thinking of her father, of the home she'd left behind, of the uncertain future ahead. "You should get some sleep," Quentin said finally. "Long ride tomorrow." "I can't sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him falling. I hear that gunshot." Quentin nodded slowly. "I know. After my brother died, I couldn't sleep for months, kept seeing his face." He poked at the fire with a stick. "It gets better, not gone, just bearable. How long has it been since your brother?" 7 months, 2 weeks, 3 days. The precision of his count told Elizabeth everything. His grief was still as fresh as hers. "What was his name?" she asked softly. "Matthew." Quentin's voice roughened. "He was 24, had a wife, baby on the way. I'm sorry. So am I." He looked up, meeting her eyes across the fire. "But sorry doesn't bring them back. Justice might not either, but it's all we've got." Elizabeth nodded, feeling a connection form between them in that moment, a shared understanding born of similar losses. "Tell me about your father," Quentin said, surprising her. For the first time since her father's death, Elizabeth found herself smiling as she spoke. She told Quentin about James Zimmerman's journey west after the war, how he'd built the bank with nothing but determination and his good name. How he'd taught her to ride and shoot, to play piano and keep ledgers. How he'd never remarried after her mother died, saying one great love was enough for any man's lifetime. "He sounds like a good man," Quentin said when she finally fell silent. "He was the best man I've ever known." Elizabeth's voice caught. "And I couldn't save him. That wasn't your job." "Then what is my job now? What do I do when this is over?" The questions that had been haunting her spilled out. "I have no home, no family. The bank is gone. Everything my father built is gone." Quentin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "You haven't lost tomorrow yet." Elizabeth looked up, startled by his words. "You've lost yesterday," he continued, "and that's a terrible thing. But tomorrow's still coming whether we want it to or not. What you do with it, that's still up to you." His words settled into her heart, not as comfort exactly, but as a truth she needed to hear. She hadn't lost tomorrow yet. It was waiting for her beyond grief, beyond vengeance. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once, then stood. "Get some sleep, Miss Zimmerman. I'll take first watch." The next morning dawned with a chill that hinted at the coming winter. They broke camp quickly and continued north, the terrain growing more rugged as they approached the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. They spoke little during the day's ride, but the silence between them had changed, becoming companionable rather than strained. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, and a cold wind whipped at their clothing. "Storm coming," Quentin observed, scanning the sky. "We need to find shelter." "There's nothing out here," Elizabeth said, looking at the open country around them. "There's an old line shack about 3 miles ahead, if I remember right. Used to belong to the Circle G ranch before they sold out." They pushed their horses harder, racing the approaching storm. They reached the line shack, just as the first heavy drops began to fall. A small, weathered cabin that had clearly stood empty for some time. Inside was sparse but serviceable. A small stove, a rough table with a single chair, and a narrow cot against one wall. "It'll do," Quentin said, looking around. "I'll see to the horses." Elizabeth busied herself clearing cobwebs and lighting the stove, while Quentin led the horses to a lean-to attached to the cabin side. By the time he returned, rain was falling in sheets, drumming on the roof and cascading down the single dirty window. "Looks like we'll be here a while," he said, shaking water from his hat. "Storm like this could last all night." Elizabeth nodded, trying not to think about the impropriety of spending the night alone in a cabin with a man she barely knew. But propriety seemed a distant concern compared to the task ahead of them. They shared a simple meal of the last of their provisions, sitting close to the stove for warmth. As night fell, the storm intensified, wind howling around the small cabin and rattling the loose boards. "You take the cot," Quentin said, spreading his bedroll on the floor near the stove. "I'll be fine here." Elizabeth wanted to protest, to insist she could sleep on the floor as well, but exhaustion overcame her. She hadn't slept properly since her father's death, and the day's long ride had taken its toll. She removed only her boots before lying down on the cot, pulling her coat around her for extra warmth. Sleep came quickly, but it was far from peaceful. Nightmares invaded her, her father falling, blood spreading across his white shirt, his eyes dimming as he whispered her name. She woke with a cry, sitting bolt upright on the cot. "Elizabeth?" Quentin was beside her instantly, concern etched on his face. It was the first time he had used her given name. "I'm sorry," she gasped, trying to catch her breath. "Just a dream." "The same one," she nodded, unable to speak further as tears threatened. Without a word, Quentin sat beside her on the cot and gently placed an arm around her shoulders. The simple human contact broke something inside her. She turned into his chest and wept for her father, for her lost home, for the innocence that had died with the sound of that gunshot. Quentin held her silently, one hand smoothing her hair, offering comfort without empty words. When her tears finally subsided, Elizabeth became acutely aware of their closeness, of the warmth of his body against hers, of the steady beat of his heart beneath her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered, pulling back slightly. "I don't usually." "Don't apologize for grieving," he said softly. Their faces were close, his blue eyes holding hers in the dim light from the stove. For a moment, Elizabeth thought he might kiss her, and for a moment she wanted him to. Instead, he gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Try to rest. I'll be right here." He moved back to his bedroll, but Elizabeth found herself missing his warmth immediately. She lay back down, listening to the storm rage outside and the occasional crackle from the stove. Across the small cabin, she could hear Quentin's steady breathing and found it oddly comforting. "Quentin," she said softly. "Yes, thank you for everything." There was a pause before he answered. "Get some sleep, Elizabeth. We've got a long road ahead." Morning brought clearing skies and a chill in the air that suggested winter was not far off. They left the line shack early, continuing north toward Virginia City, and the mysterious Fitzgerald who might lead them to Blackburn and his gang. As they rode, Elizabeth found herself studying Quentin more carefully than before. He sat his horse with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. His profile was strong, his jaw set with determination. She wondered about his life before he became a bounty hunter, before tragedy set him on this path of vengeance. "How did you learn to track?" she asked as they paused to water the horses at a small creek. Quentin glanced at her, surprised by the question. "My father taught me. He was a scout for the army before he settled down to ranching." "And your family? Is there anyone besides your brother's wife?" "My parents are gone. Pa 10 years back, Ma 5. It was just Matthew and me. Now it's just me." He tightened the cinch on his saddle. "What about you?" "No other family," Elizabeth shook her head. "My mother was an only child. My father had a brother back east, but they lost touch during the war, different sides." She ran her fingers through her horse's mane. "I always wanted siblings." "They're a blessing and a curse," Quentin said with a hint of a smile. "Matthew was 4 years younger than me, always getting into scrapes I had to pull him out of. You must have been close." "We were." The smile faded. "That's why I can't let Blackburn go unpunished." "Matthew never harmed anyone in his life." "Neither did my father," Elizabeth said quietly. Quentin met her eyes. "That's why we'll find them. Together." They rode into Virginia City 3 days later, a bustling mining town that clung to the slopes of Mount Davidson. Silver from the Comstock lode had transformed what had once been a rough mining camp into a city with theater houses, hotels, and a dozen saloons. The streets teemed with miners, businessmen, and ladies in fine dresses, a stark contrast to the quiet of Lone Pine. "How do we find Fitzgerald?" Elizabeth asked as they rode down C Street, the main thoroughfare. "Mining office first," Quentin replied. "If he's buying claims, they'll have records." The mining recorder's office was located in a solid brick building near the courthouse. Inside, a clerk in sleeve garters looked up from his ledger as they entered. "Help you?" he asked, eyeing Elizabeth curiously. "Looking for information on a speculator named Fitzgerald," Quentin said. "I'm told he operates in these parts." The clerk's eyebrows rose slightly. "Emmett Fitzgerald." "What's your business with him?" "Private matter," Quentin answered smoothly. "Just need to have a word with him." The clerk hesitated, then shrugged. "He has an office over on B Street, 2-story building with green trim. Can't miss it." They found the building easily enough, an imposing structure with Fitzgerald Mining Investments painted in gold letters on the window. A bell jangled as they entered, and a young man at a desk looked up expectantly. "May I help you?" "We're here to see Mr. Fitzgerald," Elizabeth said, stepping forward before Quentin could speak. She had decided that a woman might seem less threatening, more likely to gain access to the elusive speculator. "You have an appointment?" the clerk asked. "No, but it's a matter of some urgency." "Please tell Mr. Fitzgerald that Elizabeth Zimmerman would like to speak with him regarding Silas Blackburn." The clerk's eyes widened slightly at the mention of Blackburn's name. He rose quickly. "One moment, please." He disappeared through a door at the back of the office. Elizabeth and Quentin exchanged glances. The clerk's reaction confirmed they were on the right track. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and a tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s emerged. His dark suit was impeccably tailored, his silver hair and beard neatly trimmed. His eyes, however, were cold and assessing as they swept over Elizabeth and Quentin. "Miss Zimmerman, is it?" His voice was cultured, with the hint of an Eastern accent. "I'm Emmett Fitzgerald. I understand you wish to discuss Silas Blackburn with me." "Yes," Elizabeth said, meeting his gaze steadily. "He and his men murdered my father 2 weeks ago. We have reason to believe they're coming to see you next." Fitzgerald's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in my office." He led them through the door into a handsomely appointed room with leather chairs, bookshelves, and a massive desk. A large map of Nevada territory hung on one wall, dotted with colored pins. "Please sit." Fitzgerald gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Now, what makes you think Blackburn is coming to see me? We tracked them from Lone Pine to Bitter Springs," Quentin said. "Barkeep there said they were headed this way, looking for you, said you owed them." Fitzgerald's lips thinned. "I owe that thug nothing." He steepled his fingers. "But I'm not surprised he's coming. We had a business arrangement that went sour." "What kind of arrangement?" Elizabeth asked. Fitzgerald studied her for a moment. "Miss Zimmerman, Virginia City is built on silver, but it runs on information. I pay well for intelligence about new strikes, claim holders in financial trouble, and so on. Blackburn occasionally supplied such information." "You employed a known outlaw." Quentin's voice held disbelief. "I employed a man who had access to places and people I did not," Fitzgerald corrected smoothly. "I didn't inquire too deeply into his methods." "And now he thinks you owe him," Elizabeth said. Fitzgerald nodded. "Our last transaction went poorly." He brought me information about a claim that proved worthless. I refused to pay. He took exception to that decision. So he robbed my father's bank and killed him in cold blood, then decided to come settle his score with you," Elizabeth said bitterly. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Zimmerman." "Truly, but Blackburn's actions are his own responsibility, not mine." "When did you expect him?" Quentin asked. "I did not specifically, but if he's coming, it will likely be soon, and he won't come to talk." Fitzgerald opened a drawer and removed a revolver, placing it on his desk. "I've been taking precautions." "One gun won't stop 5 men," Quentin observed. "No, but my hired guards might. I have 3 men watching the office and my home at all times." Elizabeth leaned forward. "Mr. Fitzgerald, we don't care about your dispute with Blackburn. We want justice for my father. Help us set a trap for him and we'll make sure he never troubles you again." Fitzgerald considered her words, then nodded slowly. "What did you have in mind?" They spent the next hour formulating a plan. Fitzgerald would let it be known he was holding a significant sum of cash in his office safe, payment for a major claim purchase. The news would travel quickly in a town like Virginia City and would almost certainly reach Blackburn's ears if he was nearby. "They'll come at night," Quentin predicted. "Probably try to catch you here alone." "I'll make sure to be visible in my office late tomorrow evening," Fitzgerald agreed. "My guards will be hidden but present." "And we'll be waiting inside," Elizabeth added. Fitzgerald looked uncertain. "Miss Zimmerman, this will be dangerous." "Perhaps you should. My father is dead because of these men," she interrupted firmly. "I will be there when they're brought to justice." The speculator studied her with new respect. "Very well. Return here tomorrow at sunset. We'll be ready." They took rooms at a modest hotel near Fitzgerald's office, separate rooms, though adjacent, at Quentin's insistence. Elizabeth was grateful for the chance to bathe properly for the first time in days and to change into clean clothes. She had just finished brushing out her damp hair when a knock came at her door. "Who is it?" she called. "It's me," Quentin's voice answered. She opened the door to find him freshly shaven, his hair still damp, wearing a clean shirt and vest. The transformation was striking. Without the trail, dust, and stubble, he looked younger, though no less formidable. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, gesturing toward the hotel's dining room down the hall. "They serve a proper meal downstairs." Elizabeth realized she was indeed ravenous. They had been living on trail rations for days. "That sounds wonderful. Give me a moment." She quickly pinned up her hair and smoothed her dress, one of only 2 she'd brought with her. When she rejoined Quentin in the hallway, she caught a flicker of appreciation in his eyes that sent an unexpected warmth through her. The hotel dining room was modest but clean, with white tablecloths and a menu that offered more variety than Elizabeth had seen in weeks. They chose a table in the corner, away from other diners. "You think Fitzgerald is telling the truth?" she asked quietly after they had ordered. Quentin considered the question. "Most of it. I think he's leaving out exactly how dirty his business with Blackburn was. But I believe he's genuinely afraid of him, which works in our favor. And tomorrow, do you think it will work? It's our best chance. Blackburn's greedy. The lure of cash in that safe will be hard to resist, especially if he already believes Fitzgerald owes him." Elizabeth nodded, then looked down at her hands. "I keep thinking about what happens after, if we succeed, if we fail." "We won't fail," Quentin said with quiet certainty. "But if we do succeed." She met his eyes. "What then? You go back to bounty hunting, I go." "Where?" He was silent for a long moment. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. For 7 months, catching Blackburn has been my only goal, mine too, since my father died. But as you said, I haven't lost tomorrow yet." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I need to decide what my tomorrow will be." Their food arrived: hearty beef stew for Quentin, roast chicken for Elizabeth. They ate in silence for a few minutes, each lost in thought. "What would you want?" Quentin asked finally. "If you could choose any tomorrow," the question caught Elizabeth by surprise. No one had asked what she wanted since her father died, perhaps even before that. "I'd want a home again," she said slowly. "Not just a house, but a place that's mine. I'd want purpose, something meaningful to do with my days. And—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "I wouldn't want to be alone anymore." Quentin's eyes held hers across the table, something unspoken passing between them. "That doesn't sound impossible. What about you? What's your tomorrow after Blackburn?" He looked away, his expression troubled. "I don't know. The ranch is gone. My brother's widow moved back east to her family. There's nothing holding me anywhere." "Nothing to go back to, but nothing holding you back either," Elizabeth observed. "That's a kind of freedom." A slight smile touched his lips. "I suppose it is." They finished their meal talking of lighter things, memories of better days, stories from their childhoods. For a brief time, the weight of grief and vengeance lifted, allowing Elizabeth to see Quentin not just as the grim bounty hunter who had come into her life, but as a man with hopes and regrets of his own. As they walked back to their rooms, Elizabeth found herself reluctant for the evening to end. Outside her door, she turned to face Quentin, suddenly shy. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for everything. I wouldn't have made it this far without you." "You're stronger than you know, Elizabeth," he replied softly. "You would have found a way." In the dim hallway, with no one else around, the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Quentin reached out slowly, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Tomorrow will be dangerous," he said, his voice low. "If anything happens, nothing will happen," she interrupted, echoing his earlier confidence. "We'll succeed, and then—" "And then we'll talk about tomorrows," he finished. He leaned down and very gently pressed his lips to her forehead. It wasn't quite a kiss between lovers, but it was more than mere friendship. It was a promise. "Good night, Elizabeth. Good night, Quentin." Inside her room, Elizabeth pressed her fingers to the spot where his lips had touched her skin, wondering at the feelings this man had awakened in her amidst all the grief and rage. It seemed impossible that her heart could hold both vengeance and this tender new emotion. Yet somehow it did. The next day passed with excruciating slowness. They spent the morning checking and cleaning their weapons, then walked the streets near Fitzgerald's office, familiarizing themselves with every alley and doorway. By afternoon, an undeniable tension had settled over Virginia City. Word of Fitzgerald's supposed cash transaction had spread quickly, just as they'd hoped. As sunset approached, they made their way to Fitzgerald's office. The streets were quieter now, most businesses closed for the day. Fitzgerald was waiting for them, looking tense but resolute. "My men are in position," he told them as he locked the office door behind them. "Two outside, one on the roof." "Good," Quentin nodded. "Now we wait." They positioned themselves carefully, Fitzgerald at his desk as if working late, Quentin hidden behind a tall bookcase near the door, Elizabeth concealed in a small anteroom with the door cracked open just enough to see and hear. Each had a clear view of the main office and the street-facing window. Darkness fell completely. Fitzgerald lit a lamp on his desk, making himself visible from the street. Hours passed. The town grew quieter, the only sounds the occasional distant laughter from saloons or the clop of horse hooves on the street. Elizabeth's limbs grew stiff from holding still, but she didn't move. Her father's revolver was heavy in her hand, loaded and ready. She thought of him, of how he would have told her to be steady, to be brave. For the first time since his death, the memory brought strength rather than tears. Just after midnight, A soft whistle came from outside one of Fitzgerald's guards signaling. Moments later, they heard the faint sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk, trying to move quietly. Fitzgerald tensed, but continued to write in his ledger as if unaware. Quentin drew his revolver silently, eyes fixed on the door. Elizabeth's heart pounded so loudly she was certain the others must hear it. The lock clicked softly, someone working it with picks. Then the door swung open and 5 men slipped inside, guns already drawn. Silas Blackburn led them, a tall, scarred man with dead eyes and a cruel mouth. Elizabeth recognized him instantly from the wanted posters. "Evening, Fitzgerald," Blackburn drawled. "Working late, I see." Fitzgerald looked up, feigning surprise. "Blackburn. I wondered when you'd show your face again." "You owe me, old man. I've come to collect." Blackburn's eyes darted around the office. "Plus interest." "I owe you nothing," Fitzgerald said coldly. "The information you sold me was worthless." "Maybe, maybe not. But I hear you've got a safe full of cash for a new claim purchase. That'll square us just fine." Fitzgerald's hand moved toward his desk drawer where his revolver lay. Blackburn gestured, and one of his men stepped forward, slamming his gun against Fitzgerald's temple. The speculator slumped in his chair, blood trickling from the wound. "Check the safe," Blackburn ordered another of his men. That was when Quentin stepped from behind the bookcase, his revolver aimed at Blackburn's chest. "Don't move." The outlaws spun toward the new threat, guns swinging in Quentin's direction. Elizabeth seized the moment, stepping from the anteroom, her father's Colt aimed steadily. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, her voice surprisingly calm. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Blackburn smiled, a cold, calculating smile that sent ice through Elizabeth's veins. Well, what have we here?" His eyes moved from Quentin to Elizabeth. "A bounty hunter and a woman. Fitzgerald, you've been holding out on me." "I said drop your weapons," Quentin repeated, his voice hard. "I don't think so," Blackburn replied. "You're outnumbered. 5 against 2 and one of you's a girl." 3 against 5, Fitzgerald corrected, sitting up groggily, his own gun now in hand. "And my men outside make it 6 against 5. Blackburn's smile didn't waver. "Your men are currently taking a little nap. Seems they weren't expecting company from the back alley." Elizabeth's stomach dropped. Their trap had failed. Blackburn had been 1 step ahead. "Now," Blackburn continued, "we can do this the easy way, or—" The sound of a gunshot was deafening in the enclosed office. One of Blackburn's men crumpled to the floor, clutching his shoulder. Quentin had fired first, diving to one side as he did so. Chaos erupted. Elizabeth threw herself behind Fitzgerald's desk as bullets splintered the wood around her. She heard Quentin returning fire, saw Fitzgerald slump lower in his chair as a bullet grazed his arm. Through the confusion, one thought crystallized in Elizabeth's mind. Blackburn. She had to focus on Blackburn. He was moving toward the door, using his men as shields. She steadied her hand, remembering her father's words. Steady hand, steady eye, steady heart, she fired. Blackburn staggered, a red stain blossoming on his thigh. He turned toward her, his face contorted with rage. Before he could raise his gun, Quentin fired again. The bullet caught Blackburn in the chest, spinning him around. He collapsed against the wall, sliding slowly to the floor. 2 of his men were down now, a third surrendering with hands raised. The 4th made a break for the door, but was met by the belated arrival of Fitzgerald's guards, who had apparently recovered from whatever Blackburn's men had done to them. In moments, it was over. The room stank of gunpowder and blood. Fitzgerald was wounded but alive. 3 of Blackburn's men were captured. 1 was dead. And Silas Blackburn himself lay against the wall, blood pooling beneath him, his eyes fixed on Elizabeth with hatred. She approached him slowly, her father's revolver still in hand. This man had murdered her father in cold blood, had taken everything from her. Now he was dying on a speculator's office floor. "James Zimmerman," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You shot him in Lone Pine. He was my father." Blackburn's lips curved in a bloody smile. The banker should have moved faster with the money. He coughed, blood speckling his lips. "Doesn't matter now, does it? We all end up in the ground." "You're wrong," Elizabeth said, kneeling beside him, just out of reach. "It matters how we live. My father was a good man. He built things, helped people." Her voice hardened. "You destroyed. That's all you ever did." Blackburn's eyes were dimming now, his breathing labored. "We all make our choices." "Yes," Elizabeth agreed, "and you made yours." She watched as the life faded from his eyes, feeling not the satisfaction she had expected, but a strange emptiness. It was over. Her father was avenged, but he was still gone. The hollow space his death had left inside her remained unfilled. She felt Quentin's hand on her shoulder, warm and steady. "It's done," he said softly. Elizabeth nodded, rising slowly to her feet. She looked around the destroyed office, at Fitzgerald being tended by his guards, at the captured outlaws being bound, at the body of the man who had taken so much from her. "Let's go," she said. "There's nothing more for us here." They gave their statements to the sheriff the next morning. The story spread quickly through Virginia City, how the notorious Blackburn gang had been brought down by a bounty hunter and a banker's daughter seeking justice. Fitzgerald, recovering from his wounds, made sure to tell anyone who would listen how Elizabeth had faced down Blackburn himself. By noon, the bounties for Blackburn and his gang had been collected, a considerable sum that Quentin insisted on splitting equally with Elizabeth. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said when she protested. "It's your due." They stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, the weight of vengeance finally lifted from their shoulders. For the first time in weeks, Elizabeth felt the future opening before her, uncertain but possible. "What now?" she asked quietly. Quentin looked out over the bustling street, then back to her. "That depends." "On what?" "On what you want your tomorrow to be." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "I meant what I said before. I want a home, purpose, not to be alone." She met his eyes. "But I'm not sure where to start building that." Quentin was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was hesitant, unlike his usual confidence. "I received a telegram this morning from a friend in Colorado. He's offering me a partnership in a ranch he's starting near a town called Evergreen. Good land, growing community." He paused. "It could be a fresh start. For you," Elizabeth said carefully, "for us, if you wanted." The words came out in a rush. "I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a few weeks. But in those weeks I've seen your courage, your determination, your heart. I've come to care for you, Elizabeth. More than I thought possible after Matthew died." He took her hand gently. "I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to see if we could build something together." Elizabeth felt tears welling in her eyes, not tears of grief this time, but of something else. Hope, perhaps. Or the beginning of joy. "I care for you too, Quentin," she whispered. "When I thought I had lost everything, you showed me I was wrong. You gave me back tomorrow." He smiled, then a real smile that transformed his face, reaching his eyes and softening the hard lines grief had etched there. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes to Colorado, to seeing what tomorrow brings, together." He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "That's all I ask." 3 days later, they boarded a stagecoach heading east toward Denver, the first leg of their journey to Evergreen. Elizabeth carried little from her old life: her father's revolver, her mother's silver brush, the journal she still hadn't found the courage to read, and the bounty money that would help them start anew. As the stagecoach pulled away from Virginia City, Elizabeth looked back one last time at the place where her quest for vengeance had ended and something new had begun. Then she turned to Quentin beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Ready?" he asked softly. She nodded, taking his hand in hers. For tomorrow. Spring came early to the Colorado foothills in 1874. The ranch that Quentin and his friend Thomas had established was beginning to take shape, a sturdy main house, a barn, corrals for the horses they were breeding, and grazing land that stretched toward the distant mountains. Elizabeth stood on the porch, watching as Quentin worked with a young stallion in the corral. 6 months had passed since they'd left Virginia City. 6 months of hard work, of learning each other, of building something from nothing once again. She had found her place quickly. The small town of Evergreen needed a teacher, and Elizabeth's certificate from California had been enough to secure her the position. Each morning she taught the children in the one-room schoolhouse. Each afternoon she returned to the ranch to help with accounts, correspondence, and the 100 daily tasks that kept their growing operation functioning. And each night, she returned to the home she shared with Quentin, first as his friend and partner, then, after a simple ceremony in February, as his wife. Marriage had been a leap of faith for both of them, wounded as they were by loss. But day by day they had healed each other, learned to trust, to hope, to love. Elizabeth had found in Quentin everything her father would have wanted for her: strength, kindness, respect, and a love that grew deeper with each passing day. Now, as she watched him work, a familiar warmth spread through her chest. He looked up, sensing her gaze, and smiled, that rare, full smile that still made her heart skip. "Thinking deep thoughts," he called, securing the stallion and walking toward the house. "Just counting blessings," she replied as he climbed the steps to join her on the porch. He drew her into his arms, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "And how many have you counted today?" "Too many to number." She leaned into his embrace, breathing in the scent of him, leather and pine, and something uniquely Quentin. "I was also thinking about what you said to me that night in the line shack." "What was that?" "You told me I hadn't lost tomorrow yet." Elizabeth looked up at him, her hands resting on his chest. "You were right. And every tomorrow since has been better than the last." Quentin's eyes softened. "Even the ones where Thomas's cattle broke through the fence, or when the schoolhouse roof leaked during the spring rains." Elizabeth laughed. "Even those." Her expression grew more serious. "I finally read my father's journal last night." Quentin's brow furrowed with concern. "All of it. You've been avoiding that for months, I know. I was afraid of what it might make me feel, but it was time." She took a deep breath. "The last entry, the day he died, he wrote about me, about how proud he was, how he hoped I would find a good man someday who would see my worth." Her voice wavered. "He would have liked you, Quentin." "I wish I could have known him," Quentin said softly. "So do I. But I think, somehow, he led me to you. If he hadn't died, if Blackburn hadn't come to Lone Pine." She shook her head. "It's strange to think that the worst day of my life set me on a path to the best days." Quentin nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Life has a way of doing that. Taking with one hand, giving with the other." They stood together on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent toward the mountains, a peaceful moment in the life they were building together. "I have something to tell you," Elizabeth said finally, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Oh," she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to need a bigger house. By winter, there will be 3 of us." Quentin stared at her, stunned, then broke into a grin wider than any she had seen before. "A baby, you're certain?" She nodded, laughing as he lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "Careful, I'm in a delicate condition," she teased. He set her down gently, his hands cradling her face. "Elizabeth Daniels, you have given me back everything I thought was lost forever. A home, a purpose, a family. His voice roughened with emotion. "I love you more than I have words to say." "And I love you," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "My tomorrow, my always." As the sun set over their land, Elizabeth thought of the journey that had brought them here, a path paved with grief and vengeance that had somehow led to this moment of perfect joy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, new love. But whatever came, they would face it together. For a woman who had once lost everything, Elizabeth had found something even better, a future worth living for, a love worth cherishing, and the promise of tomorrows stretching endlessly before them like the Colorado sky. 5 years later, Elizabeth stood on that same porch, watching as Quentin taught their 4-year-old son James to ride his first pony. Their daughter Sarah, just 2, clung to Elizabeth's skirts, her blue eyes so like her father's wide with excitement as she watched her big brother. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations. What had begun as a modest horse breeding operation had grown into one of the most respected in Colorado. Their partnership with Thomas had expanded to include cattle, and the herd now numbered in the hundreds. Elizabeth had continued teaching until James was born, then had devoted herself to her children and to managing the ranch's accounts. Recently, she had begun writing articles for the Denver newspapers about life in the growing territory's pieces that had gained popularity for their honest portrayal of frontier living. The wounds of the past had healed, though the scars remained. Each year on the anniversary of her father's death, Elizabeth placed wildflowers on a small memorial stone they had erected on a hill overlooking the ranch. And sometimes, Quentin still woke in the night, reaching for his brother who was no longer there. But the life they had built together was strong enough to hold both joy and sorrow, to encompass both their past losses and their present blessings. "Mama, did you see? I'm riding," James called, his face alight with pride as he circled the corral on the gentle pony. "I see you, my brave boy." Elizabeth called back, "You're a natural, just like your father." Quentin looked up at her words, his face sun-browned and handsome, laugh lines now creasing the corners of his eyes. The haunted bounty hunter she had met in Lone Pine had transformed into this man, strong but gentle, serious but capable of such joy. Her husband, her heart. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Elizabeth and Quentin sat together on the porch swing, a ritual they had maintained through the years. The Colorado night spread above them, stars brilliant in the clear mountain air. "I had a letter from Virginia City today," Quentin said, his arm around her shoulders. "Fitzgerald has died." Elizabeth nodded slowly. They had maintained sporadic correspondence with the speculator over the years. He lived a full life, it seems. He did. Left his fortune to establish a school for minors' children. Quentin smiled slightly. "Seems he found his own redemption in the end." "We all need that, I think," Elizabeth said softly. "A chance to make right what once went wrong." Quentin's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining in a gesture as familiar as breathing. "You gave me that chance, Elizabeth. You and our children. You gave me back my future when I thought it was gone forever." "And you did the same for me," she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. "That day in Lone Pine, when you told me I hadn't lost tomorrow, yet you gave me hope when I had none." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds of their ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft nickering of horses in the barn, the whisper of wind in the pines. The life they had built together surrounded them, solid and true. "What do you think about tomorrow?" Quentin asked after a while, a smile in his voice. Elizabeth looked up at him, at this man who had helped her rebuild her world from ashes. "Tomorrow will be beautiful," she said with certainty. "Because we'll be together." And as he bent to kiss her beneath the vast Colorado sky, Elizabeth knew that no matter what the future held, she would face it with courage and hope, for she had found in Quentin's love the strength to believe in tomorrow again.